You should hear what keeps him up at night.
This is what keeps me up at night. I don't understand how my fellow Americans, I don't even understand how this election is close. And yes, I'm voting for you, but I would also vote for that wall over there.
Well, he's half right. We do need a wall. To keep out gang members, fentanyl dealers, human traffickers, and Anna Navarro. What's funny, though, is that Stern actually thought that was a compliment. Stern has become such a wussified sycophant, he doesn't realize that telling Kamala that he'd vote for a wall is telling her that he knows she's as dumb as one. This week on his radio show, Howard Stern defended wokeism, saying it's a compliment when someone calls him woke. Listen.
If woke means I can't get behind Trump, which is what I think it means, or that I support people who want to be transgender, or I'm for the vaccine, well, dude, call me woke as you want. I'm not for stupidity, but I am woke, motherfucker, and I love it.
Oh, dear, he swore. He swore that'll win over the woke.
Greg didn't just come for Howard's personality, he came for the content, too. Once a blazing wildfire of unapologetic, no-holds-barred chaos, Stern's show has fizzled into a soggy mess of celebrity bootlicking. Gutfeld didn't mince words. Watching Stern now is like watching a lion get neutered, declawed, and trained to fetch for Hollywood elites. The former king of shock radio. He's now about as edgy as a potted plant in a Marriott lobby. And the interviews? Greg practically scoffed. What used to be raw, unfiltered interrogations that sent publicists into panic mode have morphed into cozy fireside chats filled with fluff. Stern used to make headlines. Now he makes guests feel safe enough to talk about their favorite candle scents. Gutfeld joked that if things got any cuddlier, the FCC might slap a PG rating on his show for excessive goo. But Greg wasn't done. He aimed straight at the hypocrisy. The man who built an empire mocking virtue signaling now practically leads the parade. Gutfeld dubbed it performance penance, Howard's desperate, never-ending quest to scrub his wild past by overcompensating with moral overdrive. He quipped that if Stern apologizes one more time for something he said 2 decades ago, the Library of Congress might have to build an entire wing just for his public mea culpa as...
But Stern being holed up in his house that long, it explains a lot of things, like how you forget how other people live, especially in hard times like a pandemic. For the longest time, 2 years in fact, the same time Stern's been AWOL, I wondered where he went. Not physically, but mentally. I bet you did too. Remember his screeds about COVID? They were epic and angry.
But it wasn't just the content that changed. It was the posture. Gutfeld mocked Stern's new vibe like he was some enlightened monk floating above the very chaos he once thrived in. The same guy who used to wade knee-deep in controversy now acts like he's too evolved to acknowledge it ever existed. Greg didn't buy the act. That smug air of superiority. He called it what it really is, insecurity, not insight. This isn't growth, he said. It's retreat. When the cultural heat got turned up, Stern didn't rise to meet it. He folded. He didn't just walk away from the fire, Greg noted. He doused it, backed out slowly, and now pretends he never held the match. One of the most biting critiques. Stern's sudden, almost cringeworthy obsession with being liked. Gutfeld pointed out the irony. The once defiant rebel who used to shout, "I don't care what anyone thinks," from the rooftops now spends his days trying to win over the same media elites who used to blacklist him. Greg summed it up in one brutal image. The untouchable icon, now reduced to begging for validation from the very people who once cheered for his downfall, and the fans, or what's left of them. Gutfeld didn't hold back. He described Stern's current audience as a support group for listeners, too afraid to admit they miss the old days because doing so might get them canceled by the man they once idolized. Listening to Stern now, Greg said, feels like watching your favorite punk band go acoustic, trade their leather jackets for linen shirts, and start doing voiceovers for Whole Foods. Then, of course, came the political plunge.
Theory, wokeism is a contagion. Stern got it from Jimmy Kimmel, his new best friend, and Kimmel got it from his wife, and his wife got it from where you get all infections, a toilet seat. Kat, I find that his definition of wokeism is very simplistic. I mean, it's like, it's not about COVID.
But it wasn't just the content that changed, it was the posture. Gutfeld mocked Stern's new vibe like he was some enlightened monk floating above the very chaos he once thrived in. the same guy who used to wade knee-deep in controversy, now acts like he's too evolved to acknowledge it ever existed. Greg didn't buy the act. That smug air of superiority. He called it what it really is, insecurity, not insight. This isn't growth, he said. It's retreat. When the cultural heat got turned up, Stern didn't rise to meet it, he folded. He didn't just walk away from the fire, Greg noted. He doused it, backed out slowly, and now pretends he never held the match. One of the most biting critiques. Stern's sudden, almost cringeworthy obsession with being liked. Gutfeld pointed out the irony. The once defiant rebel who used to shout, "I don't care what anyone thinks," from the rooftops now spends his days trying to win over the same media elites who used to blacklist him. Greg summed it up in one brutal image. The untouchable icon, now reduced to begging for validation from the very people who once cheered for his downfall, and the fans. Or what's left of them? Gutfeld didn't hold back. He described Stern's current audience as a support group for listeners, too afraid to admit they missed the old days because doing so might get them cancelled by the man they once idolized. Listening to Stern now, Greg said, feels like watching your favorite punk band go acoustic? Trade their leather jackets for linen shirts, and start doing voiceovers for Whole Foods. Then, of course, came the political plunge.
Valium. But it's weird. He went from ridiculing the man to becoming him. No longer embracing rebellion, he French kisses regulation. He went from mocking a radio executive who was a rigid by-the-book a-hole that he named Pig Vomit to being Pig Vomit himself. He went from Howard Stern.
Dug even deeper, questioning whether Stern ever truly stood for anything at Olor if the whole persona was just a masterclass in calculated rebellion. Maybe Howard was never the fearless truth-teller he made himself out to be. Maybe he was just a guy with a sharp instinct for reading the room first, shocking his way to stardom, and now shapeshifting into whatever earns him applause from the right crowd. Today's version, the rebranded progressive sage, wagging a finger at the very rebellion he once led. But Greg wasn't fooled. He argued this isn't evolution, it's erasure. Stern isn't growing. He's scrubbing away his past, whitewashing the chaos, rewriting history as if it were just a rebellious phase. But it wasn't a phase. It was the core of who he was. And now, he's covering it all up with layers of social justice buzzwords and syrupy remorse thick enough to qualify for canonization. Gutfeld didn't sugarcoat it. This isn't wisdom, it's cowardice wearing a wise man's robe. Stern didn't face the music, he bailed on the concert and now lectures those who still blast rock and roll. The transformation wasn't admirable, it was embarrassing. And worst of all, it was predictable. Because when rebels stop rebelling, they don't just lose their edge, they become the very thing they once mocked. They become safe, sanitized, and in Stern's case, so obsessed with being accepted that he's forgotten what made anyone care in the first place.
And from getting people to fart songs out of their butt to commiserating with the super wealthy about the evils of Trump, who was a guest on Howard's show many times. But I get it now. He's got new friends and they bring new views. It's celebrity peer pressure. But the fact that he hasn't left his house in 2 years means that his views are BS. He was in a happy self-imposed lockdown with everything. Mansion on the beach, limitless options for food and entertainment. That's not real life. That's a 2-year all-inclusive vacation at Sandals Royal Barbados.
Greg leaned back with a grin, not just satisfied, but victorious. He hadn't merely roasted Howard Stern. He'd dissected him, layer by layer, exposing a man so consumed with curating his own legacy that he forgot how to actually live up to it. Stern, once the fearless leader charging into battle, was now just the guy holding the clipboard, checking names at the velvet rope, but the mic, still hot, and Gutfeld, far from finished. With the crowd still reeling from the verbal demolition, Greg rolled up his sleeves and got ready to go even deeper. Because beyond the sellout act and the glittering celebrity curtain, Howard Stern had morphed into something even more tragic than irrelevant. He'd become predictable. And for a man who once built an empire on being the curveball no one could catch, predictability wasn't just a failure, it was the death knell. Greg locked in. Stern used to be the wild card, the voice that made you lean forward, unsure of what would come flying out of his mouth next. Now you already know. Every take, every segment, every sycophantic Hollywood sit-down arrives in the same beige packaging, complete with a moral lecture no one asked for. Gutfeld didn't hold back. He quipped that you could set your watch to Stern's opinions. H1, a recycled echo of the last 3 years of mainstream media panic, wrapped up in a lukewarm monologue about being better people. all delivered from inside a multi-million-dollar soundproof bunker lined with soft pillows of self-righteousness, ego and a generous helping of, as Greg put it, gut and ass.
Incredibly brave to take this stance after you've made $300, $400 million not being woke, right? Loving Donald Trump, exploiting the mentally ill, wearing blackface. Look at the crop of woke comics, whether it's Stern or Jimmy Kimmel, his BFF, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, Michael Ian Black. What do they all have in common? They wore blackface. And then they went woke. It's not a chicken or egg thing there. You know what order it came. So I call this BFR. It's blackface reparations. There's nothing in Stern's previous career that could withstand this modern witch hunt.
And then came the kicker: Stern's newfound obsession with fear. Greg tore into it with surgical precision. The man who once thrived on chaos and confrontation now seems hellbent on avoiding even the slightest discomfort. Germs off limits, disagreement. Too risky, unpopular opinions. Absolutely not. Gutfeld dubbed it the Howard Stern Fortress of Fragility, a sanitized bunker, where reality can't reach him and criticism just bounces off the padded walls. Stern used to laugh in the face of outrage. Now, Greg joked, he practically files a noise complaint if someone raises their voice. It wasn't just about behavior, it was psychological. Stern, once the guy who poked the bear, rattled the cage, and dared the world to push back, now flinches before the door even creaks. He's not provoking anymore, he's performing safety. No more bears to poke, just kittens to pet while he lounges in a cashmere robe, sipping lukewarm tea and calling it courage. The edge is gone. The fire's out. And all that's left is the illusion of rebellion, delivered from behind the walls of a very expensive, very fragile echo chamber.
Here isn't the story. It's what Howard said later on his radio show. Quote, "I really had an exhausting weekend. Emotionally, physically. For the first time in 2 years, I ventured out of the house." Now, maybe he's exaggerating. We all do that. In fact, the more successful you get in media, the more exhausting, the easier.
The rebel who once spat in the face of conformity now clings to it like a security blanket. And then Greg turned to the very legacy Stern is so desperate to protect, the one he thinks he's preserving by sanding down every rough edge, rebranding every scandal, and pretending his past was just a messy prelude to some new, enlightened self. Greg laughed. Legacy isn't about erasing your past, he said. It's about owning it. But Stern isn't writing a new chapter, he's blacking out the old ones, acting like the ink was never even there. Gutfeld likened it to a rock star who made his name smashing guitars, only to return 2 decades later with an acoustic guitar and a speech about composting. Sure, a few polite claps. But deep down, everyone misses the noise, the danger, the honesty. Stern's biggest mistake wasn't that he changed, it's that he pretended he didn't. And just when it seemed like Greg might ease off the gas, he delivered one last brutal blow. Stern isn't the king of all media anymore. He's the court jester for the cultural elite, still in costume, still playing the part, but now dancing for applause instead of drawing blood. And the tragedy. He doesn't even realize it. With razor-sharp wit and zero mercy, Gutfeld dismantled the sanitized shell of what Howard Stern has become. The man who once thrived on raw rebellion has transformed into a polished mouthpiece for the very machine he once defied. If anyone out there still believed Stern had an edge, Greg Gutfeld just proved it's not just gone. It's dead, buried, and replaced by a brand.
What an about face. It's not unlike Howard Stern. I mean, talk about a transition. On Tuesday, he conducted an interview with Kamala Harris that was so simpering and feminine, I got my period while listening to it.
Greg Gutfeld didn't just waltz into this takedown, he stormed in with the swagger of a guy who just realized his favorite punching bag had slapped a kick me sign on his own back. And that punching bag? None other than Howard Stern, the self-crowned king of all media. Who's gone from flipping the bird at authority to flipping through cue cards pre-approved by PR teams. Gutfeld wasn't here to play nice. He came locked, loaded, and allergic to subtlety.
But that's how Stern can call snacking with celebs at a fancy restaurant exhausting. Exhausting. Like he finished the overnight shift in a coal mine. Or hearing Kat talk about her pets.
Fair.
But I get it, life is tough, especially when you've been cut off from the world for 2 years in a $20 million.
He opened fire by roasting Stern's so-called evolution, or as Greg put it, a full-blown personality transplant. The once outlaw radio renegade, now a triple sanitized mascot for everything he used to mock. Gutfeld painted the picture perfectly. A man who once lit up the airwaves like a Molotov cocktail, now reduced to making soft appearances on morning shows, sipping almond milk, and dishing out whispery life advice like a semi-retired therapist hawking his latest self-help book.
Pathetic, wondering how she doesn't nap.
When you said you don't nap, I get it, because like what you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like, when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country.
Hold on. I need a minute.
Gutfeld couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Howard Stern, the guy who built an empire by mocking phonies, had become the biggest phony of them all. The same man who once turned shock jockery into an Olympic-level sport now whispers through interviews like he's afraid of waking the interns in HR. Greg called it the greatest plot twist in media history, not because Stern evolved, but because he sold out with such shameless enthusiasm. He made late-night infomercial hosts look like martyrs of principle.